All right, today we're heading to the beautiful island of Crete. We're going to dive deep into the story of Europe's very first great civilization, the Minoans. Now, these were people so legendary that for centuries, honestly, we weren't even sure they were real. It's this incredible culture where myth and actual archaeology just spectacularly collide.
I mean, even the ancient Greeks, writing hundreds of years after the Minoans had already vanished, were totally captivated by this island kingdom. Homer's words right here, they paint this picture of a vibrant, powerful place, all ruled by a legendary king named Minos. So yeah, this is exactly where our story has to begin, deep in the realm of myth and legend.
And for most of history, that's really all the Minoans were, just a myth. You know the one, the story of a minotaur trapped in a labyrinth. So the big question for us is, how on earth did we get from that famous legend to the archaeological reality of a forgotten empire? Let's find out. Okay, so let's start with this story that everyone thinks they know, right? We're talking about the tale of a half-man, half-bull monster lurking deep in the heart of an impossible maze. It's a classic story, for sure. So King Minos of Crete, he decides to double-cross the sea god Poseidon. Bad move. As payback, Poseidon makes Minos' wife, Pasiphae, fall in love with a bull. And the result of that, well, it's the monstrous Minotaur. King Minos is, of course, horrified. He commands his genius inventor Daedalus to build a labyrinth so complex that no one can escape, all to contain this beast. The myth wraps up with the Athenian hero Theseus, who manages to navigate the maze and slay the Minotaur, but only with a little help from a simple ball of thread given to him by the king's own daughter, Ariadne. So, for centuries, that's all it was, just a story. But what happens when someone gets it in their head to go looking for the actual labyrinth? Well, let's see how this one myth sparked what is truly one of the most incredible archaeological finds in all of history. Okay, so let's introduce our main character, Sir Arthur Evans. At the turn of the 20th century, he shows up on Crete. And he's not just some stuffy archaeologist. Oh no, this guy is a man on a mission. He was completely obsessed with the Greek myths and was just utterly convinced that a story as detailed and vivid as the labyrinth had to be based in reality. He was going to find it, period. And you know what? What he found was beyond his wildest dreams. He started digging and unearthed this absolutely massive palace complex at a site called Knossos. I mean, it was a dizzying maze of rooms, corridors, and staircases sprawling over several acres. It was so complex, so labyrinthian, that Evans was absolutely certain he'd found it. And right then and there, he named this entire lost civilization Minoan, in honor of that mythical King Minos. And here's where the connection gets even deeper, and this is so cool. The actual word labyrinth probably comes from labrys, which is the symbol for a double-headed axe. And guess what they found carved all over the palace walls at Knossos? Yep, the labyrinth. So this means the labyrinth wasn't just a maze, it was literally the house of the double axe. A single word, you guys, connects the myth directly to the archaeology. Incredible. So Evans had found a real, honest-to-goodness civilization, one that lasted for almost 2,000 years. It's amazing. Archaeologists now break its history down into 4 main phases, and it's all centered on these magnificent palaces. You can kind of see the progression right here. It starts with the rise of towns, then the first great palaces get built, then you have this incredible golden age, the Neo-Palatial period, where Minoan culture is at its absolute peak. And then, the final phase, that's where we see their decline, as they eventually fall under the control of the mainland Greeks. So what was life actually like inside these grand structures during that golden age? Good question. Let's step inside the palaces and get a feel for what it really meant to be Minoan. These palaces were, and I'm not exaggerating, true architectural marvels. We're talking about sprawling, multi-story buildings that even had advanced plumbing systems. But there are 2 features that really stand out. First, you've got these unique red columns that are kind of weirdly wider at the top than the bottom. And second, it's about something that isn't there, huge defensive walls. And that absence, well, that's a massive clue about how the Minoans saw the world and their place in it. And what's so crucial to understand is that these weren't just fancy homes for kings. No, they were the bustling nerve centers of the entire civilization. Think of it like this. Imagine you combine a city hall, a cathedral, a factory, and a giant warehouse, and you roll it all into one spectacular building. That's kind of what these were. This kind of centralization of power, religion, and the economy, it's a hallmark of early complex societies, and boy, did the Minoans perfect it. Now, to manage all this activity, the Minoans developed their own writing system. We call it Linear A. But here is the tantalizing mystery. To this day, no one
Nobody has been able to decipher it. We have thousands of these tablets, but the language they hold is completely silent. It's so frustrating. Now, the script that came after, Linear B, that was actually an early form of Greek used by their conquerors, the Mycenaeans. And that one, we cracked it back in the 1950s. But it only tells us about the very end of the Minoan story, not the glorious chapters that came before. So all of this, the lack of walls, the beautiful art that's all about nature and festivals, it brings us to a really big historical debate. Is it possible the Minoans created a uniquely peaceful society? Something historians call the Pax Minoica, or the Minoan peace. Well, the evidence here is, let's just say it's complicated and really fascinating. On the one hand, you have all the arguments for a peaceful society. Those open palaces, art that's all about bull leaping and nature scenes, not war, and what looks like a really high status for women. But then, on the other hand, you find a completely different story. Archaeologists have found small, fortified outposts, and, kind of ironically, the Minoans produced some of the absolute finest swords in the entire Aegean. So, what's the deal? Were they peaceful traders, or were they a superpower so confident they didn't even need walls at home? Honestly, the jury's still out on that one. But look, whether they were peaceful traders or armed enforcers, one thing is absolutely undeniable. Their power was felt far, far beyond the shores of Crete. That's because the real key to understanding the Minoans isn't on the land at all, it's on the water. These people were the first true masters of the Mediterranean Sea. The later Greeks actually had a special word for this kind of power, a thalassocracy, which basically means sea empire. And it's a really profound idea. See, this wasn't just about trade. It meant using their powerful navy to completely own the sea lanes. They created safe passage for their merchants by getting rid of pirates. It meant they could project their influence all across the Aegean through a network of colonies and trading posts. They created this whole Minoan sphere of culture that stretched from Egypt all the way to the Greek mainland. They ran the place. And that brings us to the final and the greatest mystery of all. For more than 500 years, the Minoans dominated the Aegean. They were the top dog. And then, at the absolute height of their power, they just vanished, seemingly overnight. The archaeological record tells a brutal story. Around 1450 BC, a wave of violent destruction just sweeps across Crete. Palaces, villas, towns, almost everything is burned to the ground, totally destroyed. So the question is, what on earth could cause such a sudden and total collapse? The answer, honestly, reads like the script for a modern disaster movie. We've got a few prime suspects, and it looks like a deadly 1-2-3 punch. First up, the volcano. We're talking about the cataclysmic eruption of Thera, which is modern-day Santorini, one of the biggest eruptions in recorded history. That eruption triggered the second blow, a mega tsunami that would have just wiped out the Minoan coastal towns and crippled their fleet. And finally, the invaders. With the Minoans on their knees, opportunistic Mycenaean warriors from the mainland swooped in to deliver the final killing blow. So just to be clear, it probably wasn't the volcano itself that wiped them out in an instant. Instead, what it did was create the perfect storm. This massive natural disaster absolutely shattered their economy and their naval power, which basically left the door wide open for the Mycenaeans to just walk in, take over, and even rebuild places like Knossos for themselves. But, the Minoan story doesn't completely end there. And this is a huge testament to their influence. The conquering Mycenaeans were so impressed by Minoan culture that they basically adopted a ton of it. We're talking their art, their frescoes, their administrative systems, and even their script, which they adapted into what we call Linear B. So even though the Minoans as a people were gone, their legacy directly shaped the next great civilization in Greece. Which leaves us with one last, really tantalizing thought. Think about it. A super sophisticated island empire, total masters of the seas, wiped out by a volcanic cataclysm and swallowed by the waves. Does that sound familiar at all? There's a really popular theory that the memory of the Minoan collapse, passed down through the generations, was the real historical seed that eventually blossomed into Plato's famous legend of the lost city of Atlantis. So we started with a myth, and we might just be ending with one too.
History isn't dust, it's a journey through time. Here on History LM, we tell it simply and fast. If you love discovering the past in just a few minutes, hit like and follow History LM. Your next journey through time is waiting.